But the more that you can do that, the more you can stay calm, breathe, smile to yourself when you're going through that discomfort, I believe that translates over more to what neurological strength is, because then you're more in control. You're telling your body what to do as opposed to your brain inhibiting what you want it to do. So kind of switching that mindset, and that takes a lot of practice to do.
That was Dr. Mark Wetzel, and you're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Today's podcast is brought to you by our longtime sponsor, SimplyFaster.com. There's 2 items I'd like to talk to you about today that you can find in Simply Faster's online store. Whether you're a coach or an athlete, these are both things that you'll find highly useful as tools in your training toolbox. The first is blood flow restriction training methods. And after hearing about blood flow restriction training for years now, as well as the results that athletes are getting with it, especially in, for example, lactate sports like swimming, 100-meter freestyle, and not only hearing of that, but also seeing how much some swimmers had liked that type of training method, I knew I had to start trying it out myself. So I've been utilizing the air bands. I really enjoy it, both the feeling while I'm actually training with them, as well as seeing the visual result of spending time training with the methods and then the strength result. They've been a really cool training tool, and I would definitely recommend checking into air bands. SimplyFaster.com also has Be Strong brand blood flow restriction. The second item is the VMAX Pro, and this is a new option for velocity-based training, barbell tracking. It provides valuable load-based data, including speed in all phases of a lift, and it delivers key metrics such as power, velocity, distance, as well as duration of effort. The VMAX Pro system measures any lift you can think of. It's portable, durable, and intuitive. You can check out these 2 items and much more at our sponsor, SimplyFaster.com's online store. Let's get on to the show. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm glad you're here, and thanks for tuning in. When it comes to all methods of exercise that are out there might be none more intriguing than long isometric holds. For example, an isometric lunge that's held for 5 minutes straight. Why would you do that? That's exactly the question. The first time I started to incorporate long isometric holds, or iso extremes, as Jay Schrader, who's the modern facilitator of really integrating this method in our training times, has called them. In my first experience really integrating that training method into my own work, my own methods in my mid-30s, I found a very rapid, about a 2 to 3 inch increase in my running vertical jump after about 2 to 3 weeks of using iso extreme holds and super slow holds moving into the stretch range position. The way my body felt in the course of that training after a few weeks of that type of method, I was on this nonstop journey to figure out more about why that was. And that deep dive has led me to having discussions with numerous guests on that topic, such as Jerome Simeon, Tommy John, Alex Lee, Brady Volmering, and then our guest today, who probably has the record for the most discussions that I've had with a guest on extreme isometrics or long isometric holds, and that is Dr. Mark Wetzel. Mark is a chiropractic neurologist based out of Nashville, Tennessee. He is not only a chiropractor, but has substantial experience training athletes and then being a student of isometrics and training himself. In the first episode that I did with Dr. Mark, he spoke on how he trained a baseball team using only the isometric holds for 5 minutes each, like a lunge, push-up, Superman, and some others. And that team experienced amazing strength gains. And so ever since then, we've had some great conversations on different aspects of the isometric training method. On the show today, Dr. Mark will give his thoughts on how a positive mental state can improve one's ability to sustain the hold in those isometric or pulling positions, or really increase our muscle endurance in general. And it's always really cool to explore that link between the mind and the body. Mark will speak extensively on the postural and the muscle tone elements of holding the isometrics or the isometric exercises. And he'll also speak on the fascial elements of the isometrics, the fascial lines that we are actually working in the course of some of these movements, and how there is connotations in that from an electrical perspective, a total body function perspective. Finally, as Mark is a chiropractic neurologist, he will give his take on what he feels neurological strength truly is and how that is manifested in a program's results. One of the first things Dr. Mark talks about is a mental practice that you can do prior to or during the isometric holds. And I found after the show that this practice could actually help me do a hold around 25% longer. And I'm just getting started with it. So really cool stuff. And it's really cool to see how the mind can impact what the body can do. Anyways, let's get on to the show. Episode 298 with Dr. Mark Wetzel. Mark, man, it's awesome to have you back on the show. I have a question for you on okay, so people who have listened to these podcasts in the past, we talk a lot about the isometrics and the long holds, and they can obviously be very difficult. And it's just funny, when I'm days where I'm stressed out, I'll do a hang from a bar and I start feeling pain and fatigue so fast into that hold, on a day versus a day where life is just no problems, like I'm sitting on the beach or something. And I always think about, man, this is not just in the muscle in the sense of where is this fatigue coming from? And what are your thoughts on just the mental element? When you see people hitting that threshold, and I know it's so easy to say it's just mental or, whatever thoughts on mental toughness are in there, but any thoughts on helping people to achieve a better mental state to navigate a physically difficult or taxing movement?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an open-ended question, but every time when we do ISOs and we have a really good day, and then the next day we have a really bad day, we always try to justify it. We're like, okay, well, what did I do different yesterday? Why was I so much stronger? Why was I able to hold it longer? And then it's funny, our first reaction to the next day when we can't hold it as long or we feel weaker is I must have done something wrong, or man, why did I regress, or what happened why am I not excelling? And that's really just a mentality coming from a standpoint of fear, right? And let's just use fear and love as two opposites. I know there's lots of emotions that are negative, lots that are positive, etc. But essentially that's coming from a state of fear. You just thought you did something wrong, you thought you failed. And so what I try to do is every time I'm, I guess, in one of those modes, is I just try to bring up some sort of happiness or joyful emotion to totally take my mind off of it. And in this book, Taoism book that I read a while ago, they have this meditation called the smiling meditation. And you literally just go through your body and you smile at every part in your body. And in all honesty, when you do that, there's this sense of relaxation comes through, and it actually allows me to do whatever the task I'm doing just a little bit longer. I'm not saying it magically goes away and I'm fully energized and healed, but with enough practice, I mean, you can do that almost instantaneously. You can do it multiple times in a row. And it actually does create quite a bit of difference. So again, coming back to, everything is mental. I mean, it kind of is, right? That's the annoying part. But the smiling at yourself, and a lot of people don't really even smile anymore these days. They don't even know how to. It's for whatever reason, this day and age, everyone's, monotone, or don't show your emotions, or, everyone's trying to hide something. I don't know, but just literally just try smiling at yourself. And the biggest thing is your eyebrows. So everyone will kind of squeeze their eyes together and kind of get the wrinkles in their forehead. That's where it starts. So you need to relax your forehead and your eyes and then learn to smile at yourself.
Yeah, I think I should have some sort of mass research project. Everyone do, whatever your standard isometric hold time is for maybe just a hang, and then do the meditation, then try it again. It makes me think about back when I worked with water polo at UC Berkeley. It was water polo compared to other sports. Water polo is a tough sport. And I mean, I think there's different definitions of mental toughness, but as their strength coach, I was expected to challenge them a lot more than, let's say, the tennis team or something like that. That's kind of an expectation. And so I wasn't a big fan of doing HIIT circuits or that kind of thing. I mean, we did circuits, but I tried to throw a lot of ISOs in there rather than high heart rate, traditional. I tried to really stick almost every other station. If we had 8 stations, I would put an ISO and things. And I felt like that was just a really cool blend of things, to be able to kind of satisfy what the coaches were looking for, but then also to keep the athlete's awareness, not just on, I just hope I make the coach happy by doing enough, med ball throws against the wall, but it's also hey, you get to go internal, and that's really important. And so, but another thing that I often did with them that I found interesting, I learned so much from having them do this. And I'm not a mental toughness in the standard form, type person at all. When I train track athletes, 400 runners, I always was on the low dose side and that kind of thing. But anyways, we would do just a bar hang to start or finish the workout. How long can you go? And there was so many mental elements in there in the sense that there was people who were full well capable of hanging up there a lot longer than they did. And it was interesting, though. There were some people who routinely just couldn't even get a minute, just routinely. And
I know those people.
Oh, it's crazy. And I think if you would have asked me this 10 years ago, I would have said, it's just a cop-out to say it's mental. Because to me, that was like the cop-out, that you couldn't figure out a training thing that could keep them up there, right? But it was just something about that time, too. Honestly, I felt like if you turned off the sense of what time was, they probably could have at least gotten past that threshold. But I remember the one day that we were able to get some of those athletes a serious breakthrough. And I do believe when you get a big breakthrough like that with a hold time, it can open up levels of confidence and belief in yourself. But I had them write their goal on the board in front of everybody. And then I gave them like a visualization. Like, it's like I just had this podcast with Nick Winkleman talking about storytelling and language. And that's something I need to get better at. But I did have this thing in my head where I'm like, I told them to visualize, like, if you don't hang up there, you're going to fall into like a pit or something, or there's like sharks swimming in it. And they had a board to write their time in front of everybody. And anyways, two of those people who barely ever couldn't get a minute, they got like a minute 30 and a minute 40. And I just felt like that was the biggest breakthrough for them, because it was a big, it's just the way they would approach not just being tough to be tough. I think that is not really that useful, but just more to see how can you utilize the way you shift a problem to overcome it. However, sorry, I'm like really going long on this reply, but it makes me think about, like you said, fear and love, in a sense of, I don't know, maybe there was a little bit of like, you write your thing on the board in front of other people, like that's a different element, but like whatever visualization. But I think about so often mental toughness is presented to athletes in the form of fear. Like, do this or this happens. Do this or this happens. And so it's and I'm not saying that doesn't get a result, like when you're looking for people to complete the test, but if you can find a more, and a lot of people on this podcast have talked about giving athletes autonomy and you creating a little bit more open system of open lines of communication and coaching, and more of like it brings a different perspective to how to get that result. Because I think a fear result could maybe get you that time, but I think it would hurt a lot more than like a smiling on your, in that internal based awareness, smiling on yourself, smiling on your muscles in your body. I would imagine you would not perceive the exercise in the same way as a fear-based approach to that task.
Yeah. And it's funny you say that, like the fear-based mentality is almost like a traditional way of training. Like everyone's like, when you're getting ready to do a max or, run as fast as you can, they're always like, like dig deep, think of something that hurts or painful. And then, they always perceive it as, okay, well then now let's try and overcome it to kind of create that energy boost. And it's like, well, you could just try the opposite, just start from a very loving standpoint and see how that works out too. So
yeah, it's definitely interesting. I will, the smiling meditation, I will definitely have to give that a shot, and I'll report back to you for sure. Or even just like laughing and smiling through it. I don't know. I'm sure. That'll be something I'm really interested in, because I feel like it is so cool for me to think about the spectrum as well. And I know we're going to get into like posture and position a little bit more, and I think about the isometrics and the whole scope of things compared to like. And I just had this really awesome podcast with Nick Winkleman recently talking about cueing and language and creating stories to help athletes carry out a technique. And sprinting is like very complicated, joints doing all sorts of different angles really quickly. Whereas in isometric, it's so slow. I mean, you're slowly pulling into it, but it's like it takes that awareness like shrunk, like just down into a different level, really. But I just think that's so cool where it's like that's where that meditative level lives a little bit more, I think. I mean, not that it couldn't be helpful for some of the fast stuff, but I think that almost plays by just a little different language than what we're trying to do in that slow space.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so anyways, I want to get more into position. Some things you've talked about quite extensively on our other talks about isometrics, been
for sure
pulling into a position. And I think, if I tell an athlete pull into position, well, I mean, what does position mean fundamentally? Could you talk to me a little bit about what does position mean? Like, what does it mean to be in position as we get into isometrics?
Yeah. So I think, and for one person to understand position, they also need to understand posture. So posture is a huge, crazy term these days. Everyone's going to have good posture. I try to simplify what posture means, and basically it comes back to the breath. And so our body is very, on a day-to-day, it survives. And so in order to survive, you have to breathe. And breathing is the most important function, next to your heartbeat. Those two are pretty much up there. And so our body is going to find a way to breathe most efficiently no matter what. So typically when people have bad posture, it's because they have bad breathing mechanics. And so when the breathing mechanics start to go, our body is going to form or change around our breathing position to make our breathing easier. So it'll sacrifice essentially good quote unquote posture to make sure that we breathe more efficiently. So if you can kind of understand that that's mostly what posture is, it has everything to do with breath, and you can kind of take away from, or you can kind of like change your mindset of like, oh, well, my shoulders need to be down and back, or my neck needs to be in this position, or, blah, da, 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 which they do play a role. But again, everything's dependent on your breath. So if you, hunch forward is a pretty good, like a lot of people have that problem these days just because we sit. And so our body essentially is, if we sit all the time, it's going to find a way to breathe efficiently while sitting. And in order to do that, it actually creates more of a hunched over in the shoulders, because then it takes pressure off of our ribs and it can expand more to help us breathe. So position is based off of posture. So correct position, in my opinion, is how well you can breathe in a certain position. And I know we've kind of talked about that. So another one, a good example about posture is jumping. So like calf jumps or rebounding, more rebounding kind of. You'll figure out when you do a bunch of rebounds in a row, your body will start to position itself in a way that'll make you do it. And it's funny, you'll see a lot of people's heads start to go forward because their head needs to be forward in order to keep doing the exercise or keep breathing. And so it'll kind of bring out these compensations, which is kind of cool. But anyways, let's go back to position and pulling into position. So basically pulling means you're using your muscles that are going to bring you towards the ground. And so a lunge, pulling into position, would mean that you're actively engaging the muscles that are going to bring you to the ground. A lot of the times when we get into a lunge, we'll kind of sit there and hang out, and we actually won't engage the hamstring because our quad is doing more work to essentially push us away from the ground. So it's a different exercise the moment your hamstring shuts off and your quad starts overtaking. So pulling into position is kind of that simple too. So posture is everything to do with breath. Pulling into position means everything to do with whatever muscles are going to bring you into the ground. So another common misconception is like a push-up or a bench press. So like, what would you think of pulling into position being in the bench press would be?
Yeah.
Like what muscles look good?
Yeah. I think most people would say like some sort of mid back and lats pulling down into it. Something like that.
Yep. Do people ever think of the biceps either? Biceps is a huge one on the bench press that people don't realize, and they oftenly negate. So again, it's very being aware of what all the muscles that are engaged pulling something into the ground. And same with a push-up. You want to use those biceps, you're at the lats, posterior delt, a lot of the backside. And it's not like you're not engaging like your pec and things like that. Those are obviously still working too. But it's just more about where is the intention behind it. And intention is huge too and could be talked about for a very long time. But having good position or good posture is everything to do with breath. And that's kind of what I see a lot these days is people negate the breath, is they will sacrifice their breath to stay in a quote unquote good position. And I think that almost causes more harm than good, especially when people start holding their breath and things like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think about it a little bit in terms of a lot of the, I don't know, like an ISO push-up holder, an ISO lunge. I mean, it's like you have like a long kind of straight spine, but an ISO push-up could really easily become like a very overextended position if you're almost like over pulling. But the only way to be overextended, like when your ribs are flaring forward and your back is a little bit too arched, like that kind of thing, it would seem to me that that's a point where you've lost the canister of air and
Yeah.
that the breathing is no longer what it needs to be. And it kind of, I have a lot of like young athletes who I've actually been thinking about the push-up progressions for some of them that I work with, because they're so like, there's no way they could do a feet on the ground iso push-up. They're just way too weak. And then even when you go to the knees, it's like they still have problems. So I'm like, all right, well, where do we go from here? Yeah, and to think about it from a point where I want them to be in a good overall posture before we really get into anything else. And so I think the breathing too, being able to breathe in whatever modified position that you can get into is really important. A lot of athletes have no idea. They're like, all right, coach has got me in this position, this arrangement, and I need to hold it for this time. Okay. The breath is the breathing mechanics are something we don't oftentimes really integrate into that.
Well, the breathing mechanics are kind of confusing too, and we don't spend a lot of time doing it. But I mean, if you think of every single ab muscle, or let's just put it this way, any muscle that is attached to your ribs or your spine is an associated breathing muscle that helps you breathe. So that's a lot of muscles. So, I mean, your chest, your psoas, all your ab muscles. So if you're not really consciously aware of that all those muscles go into breathing, and then someone's just like, hold this position and learn to breathe. I'm not saying you're doing it wrong, but like there's so much more you can evolve from it. So I always laugh when I see these kind of people where they'll like to stack, let's go back to the push-up, because I see it all the time too, or people like to stack weight on the back of their push-up, or they'll elevate their feet. Mm-hmm. And clearly you can see this arch in their back. And it's like, yeah, they can add more weight and they hold it and it's really cool. And I'm sure they get stronger and whatnot. But if you just figure out a way to remove all that weight, even take your feet down, even go against a wall, and just really how to figure out how to pull, like engage those muscles, and then also learn how to breathe using all those breathing muscles, you can accomplish, I would say, even more than putting weight on and trying to hold it, even though you have no weight. It's way more tedious. It's way more like intention. You actually have to use your brain. Some people like to cop out and throw a bunch of weight on and just like go numb for a while. And that's one way of training. It's just not really my preferred method. But you can accomplish so much just from thinking like, okay, what's going on with this exercise? Where am I breathing? Where am I not breathing? Am I breathing low? Is my chest elevated? Is it depressed? And so it's kind of, I find that unique because it's almost endless. But other people find it very boring. And I mean, I understand that it's not for everyone. So,
yeah, that's the thing with a lot of this type of work is you really have to want to do it and get better, or you have to find ways to trick athletes into doing it. One of the two, like a mental
trickery is good.
Like it is interesting with, some of the things that I've been doing, or at least I think of with this type of thing is, I like doing a lot of work on parallettes, and I really have enjoyed actually like that top kind of almost hollow position of the push-up when your hands are on parallettes and you are really like taking the scapula forward and the thorax back, and you're kind of putting everything back a little bit, and then go down into the push-up where then you are like, you could pull the shoulder blades back a little bit. The more I learn about posture though, I try not to get too carried away with ending up an extent, or, too, like, I guess we can get to this point where any extension, we can be like, oh, we don't want to go there. But I mean, we should be able to go wherever. But I guess what I'm saying is I feel like position is more about just getting all those antagonists, like maintaining like a good, like relatively good spinal length, breathing, and then just getting the antagonists online. Like one of the things I did recently with the lunge, even just a small tweak, was one day recently a lunge, my intention was just rear leg straight, that straight rear leg, just getting the glute to be more online. And I was so sore in my glutes the day after that small change. Whereas normally, I guess I wouldn't, I guess the muscle tone in that back leg would have been less. I was just generally pulling down, not putting my awareness on my rear glute. But just by that little subtle change, I got way more out of it from a hip perspective. And it makes sense that just kind of going through almost a checklist of, do I have tone here and here? And thinking about that as position as well, like what muscles can pull me here, what ones are not helping me pull down, being really powerful as well.
Yeah, and like it's tedious and it's annoying, but it's like the results are they're almost infinite, because you can think of something new every single day. So I like it.
What do you think about? I think we all have seen this. For those of us who have utilized isometric work, especially like a lunge is the easiest place to see it. I feel like is the athletes who just either A, seems like they literally don't want to pull downwards into it, or B, and maybe that's most of it, or B, they can't. Like, or maybe they're kind of like bouncing like subtly, like a millimeter up and down. I see that a lot. Like athletes who kind of, they go up a little bit, they go down a little bit, they go up a little bit. And I just think to myself, I've just told you to pull downwards. Like, why can't you do this? and those are athletes who are not typically very explosive, strong, resilient, all those things that we want. That is almost always a commonality, is that those athletes just seem to have a lack in being able to steadily, with a lock, be pulling into it. They're always just like bouncing, or they just don't seem like they can or want to.
Yeah, I see that often too. And I honestly think they can't. They don't know how to. So literally you have to not necessarily teach them, like trick them. You're like, okay, well, this is what it feels like to engage your hamstring. And I mean, I've gone through 30 minutes where they still can't do it. Like I'm literally like, okay, let's try this, let's try this, let's try this. And they just don't know how to. So that's just an awareness thing. It's probably habits, right?
Mm.
Like, I don't know. So you've been doing something your entire life one way and you're just automatically changing it, which sucks too, because it can be very defeating to someone, right? Like, oh, I couldn't do this, and that's bad. So it's like, how do you approach it in a manner of like, well, we didn't get it today. I mean, that's okay, because what we did, this was still beneficial. It's not like it was bad. I mean, we worked out, but it can be tricky because you can make them seem like they did something wrong if they didn't do it right or correctly, which is something I've noticed that you kind of got to be careful with how you word things. Back to that mental aspect, fear and love type mentality.
I wanted to take a break from the show and briefly share with you the difference that performance herbalism can make for you. Several years ago, I had Logan Christopher, CEO of Lost Empire Herbs, on the show to talk about hypnosis and mental training for athletes. While talking to him, I realized he also had an herbalism company. So shortly thereafter, I used the Phoenix formula, which was my first product I bought from them. I had great results with it, not only increasing my energy and decreasing my need for coffee and caffeine, but I also noticed that it was making an impact on my lifts and my weight room numbers. I was having a great training experience. Shortly thereafter, I also got into the Shilajit resin as well as other herbs. And I don't look at supplementation the same way. I'm a strong believer in what Logan and his company are doing in looking for a natural resource to boost human performance. If you want to check out the herbs that I use personally from Lost Empire Herbs, you can head to www.lostempireherbs.com/justfly. There you can get 15% off your order, and they offer a 365-day money-back guarantee. Definitely check them out. Let's get on back to the show. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and how that's something that, as I learn more about the language of things, which I think is so important to really get the best results, to communicate things to the athlete that really inspire them. And I think it's very easy to tell them all the things that they do wrong.
Yeah, it's super easy.
What do you think about, like, Dan Fichter had this mechanism that he probably mentioned this 4 years ago to me, but like the idea of someone like you has a hard time activating their hamstring, or like whatever muscle it is that you have a hard time activating to get down into that movement, like a lunge, or like, we can use a lunge as an example. It's pretty easy. Dan would use a band, like a jump stretch band, and loop it around like a power rack on one end, low, and then the other end would loop around the athlete's calf or mid calf. Yeah. And that would like create this constraint, like from the outside, that if they don't fire with their hamstring, their shin's going to get away from them forward. Like, do you use anything like that, or do you have any thoughts on like external constraints or ideas on creating constraints that might force an athlete to recruit some of those pulling muscle groups down into whatever it is you're trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely seen that before. Although external devices and things have a very valuable place in any sort of training or treatment, I tend to like to stick to more internal awareness. So something that you need to figure out, on your own. So I almost would do something where I would put them in a position where the hamstring has to work, and almost like get their hamstring to like cramp. Like a good example is like have them lay in their stomach, and they crunch their ribs down, they push their hips into the ground, and then they kick their leg up. So it's almost like you're putting your hip into extension while you're kind of pushing your hips into the floor. And basically that turns your hamstring on. And your hamstring is completely on because it has to keep the leg from going straight. And they'll eventually get this kind of pain or cramp in their hamstring. And then I'll immediately flip them over and put them into a lunge. So then now that they have all this sensation in their hamstring, and I'll have them, okay, now pull down in. And they'll be like, oh, I kind of felt something in my hamstring just because it had been working for so long. But those are the cues that I tend to stay more with, as opposed to like pushing someone into like a certain position or using my hands to like, because then they'll resist. And that's just my experience. I don't know if one way is better than the other, but that's just the way that I go about things.
Sure. Yeah. Just like an external stimulus versus an internal. Like, I mean, I think they both have powerful benefits. And it'd be interesting too. I was just thinking for a push-up, like you could maybe do like a set of like almost basically just arm curls or an isometric arm curl at a similar angle. And for like biceps, like, can you recruit biceps to pull into this? Or maybe like a T-based hold with a band. I don't really use those, but like the rotator cuff series. But I don't know, just to like help be like, hey, can you feel this muscle group pulling you into this? Just to get that. And we talked about this a little bit before we started recording, like the kind of some of these origins, trying to figure out the origins of like the resisted stretching, pulling into a position type thing. I was reading Bob Cooley's book, and I know you had talked to me about that individual or doctor with the resisted stretching. And the common theme is pulling into it, agonist, antagonist. Like it's that you get the muscles on the one side contracting, the muscles on the other side lengthening. And so anyways, it just seems like you could also, use some of those priming exercises in that way. I've seen Werner Gunther. That's like people, it's funny. That was in the 80s with Werner Gunther, the shot putter training. And he was doing stuff where he would do like a set of leg extensions and then jump into squats in a particular part in his training phase. And so it almost seems like you could also, do pretty much infinite, like whatever muscle group you're trying to get more tone, you could maybe do like a small sensation movement and then try to bring that in. I'll definitely have to try that myself. I'm sure you could be so creative with that whole series.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I like that too. And it's like, you got to keep in mind too, that pulling into position and posture, like, we're not static. We're not designed to like stay still. I know in an isometric, obviously we're being as still as possible from a visual standpoint, but there's a lot going on in our body. But like, I want to go back to your push-up. Remember how you were saying that you would start the push-up where your shoulders are completely retracted forward. Mm-hmm. And then as you pull down into position, then you start to retract your shoulder blades. I mean, every movement should be like that. So like your shoulder blades should not start in one position and end in that same position, right? So figure out a way throughout the whole movement, what is going on with the movement, right? If you're in the top of a push-up, you're right, your shoulder blades should be as far forward as possible. But then by the time you get to the bottom of the push-up, they should be as far back as possible and down and stuff like that. So
yeah, that's something that I've become more and more aware of is, there's lifting for like performance, like just outputs, like, and that would be, to me, that's things like that you can throw in the weight room occasionally, like more like partial squats is a little more output way of lifting, or like a hex deadlift with high handlebars is a little more output. It's a little bit more like late stance drive. But then you have the health, I guess you could call it the strength, health and robustness lifting, which is like a deep squat where you maybe work the heels on the way down and the knees can be out a little bit. And then on the reversal, you get a little bit of internal rotation, the knees can come forward and you move to your midfoot. And there's like this 3D, you're working more of the fullness of your movement capacity and fullness of range. And that's the way I think about, you can kind of train either way. And I think they're both important. But if you don't train in the full 3D way and you just do output stuff, that's where you can run into problems from like your injuries creeping up, or you just maybe can't recover from some of the other work as well. And I kind of I've just been thinking about that so much more with training. I think you can get it out of different places.
Yeah. The full range of motion, I guess, is what you would say, is if you don't have it, then injuries are way more prone to happening to you.
Yeah. Back to something you said before with the breathing. I forget exactly what the context was, but it was I was thinking about a Jay Schrader movement where I've never seen any other coach do this. And Jay obviously pioneered so much of this ideology, but it was like a single arm bench press where you would have the bar, you're lying on your back and you're just holding the bar at arm's length out like a bench press. And then you're balancing it and you have to do a certain amount of breaths between each like single arm bench. So I will do a single arm bench press at some point, but I'm just going to hold it up top and breathe for like 10 breaths, or it takes forever. But I always found that so cool because it's really so much about the breathing, and also that like in the postural restoration world, it's like more of a flexion of the scapula rather than always being in that compressed shoulders back standard bench position that gets you into trouble as well. And I just thought that was a really cool. You talking about the breathing and the scope of a push-up type thing, that really makes me thinking more about that. It makes me feel like those athletes who have a trouble with the iso push-up, even the base progression, maybe they could be better served by something like that, to get better at the breathing and just holding that posture. They get self-reinforcement of posture with their back on a bench for a little while, and they focus on their breathing, and they at least have the scapular strength. And maybe maybe that would be a good place to go with the breath, the base of breath, I guess.
Well, that's a huge exercise for breathing, because when you're holding a bar with one arm, your whole left, let's just say you're holding your right arm, the whole left side of your body has to stabilize. And people don't realize that if you keep your abdominals engaged to where your midline doesn't shift when you're holding that. So the moment I put the bar up, typically what's going to happen is you're going to twist at some point on your left side of your body to counter off that balance. You can stay midline. Like an easy way to do that is just like look at your abs and your six pack, your rectus abdominis. If that line that goes down the middle of your abs, if that line stays in the middle, then you're usually doing a pretty good job. But you'll start to realize that maybe your right hip comes off a little bit and that line kind of shifts. And so then you realize that I wouldn't say come out of position, but that's going to compromise your breathing, right? So now what muscles can I use to pull that midline back in while holding this bar up is quite difficult with your abs. So, I mean, it is very beneficial if you, like I said, it's the intention part though. Like no one's paying attention to their hips. I mean, even their hamstrings in that position, because your right leg is going to come off the ground a little bit because your left leg is going to stay planted to kind of hold that bar up. Or sorry, the right leg will stay planted if I'm holding in my right hand. So learning to engage that left side hamstring to keep the balance, like I said, it's endless. I mean, I geek out over that stuff, but it's boring to a lot of other people.
Yeah, just sitting there in a position like you would watch that single arm bench press and be like, man, this is so boring to watch. But there's a lot going on. It kind of almost makes me think too of like a lot of lower body exercises. I mean, when someone's like feet are dysfunctional and they've been wearing, clodhopper shoes their whole life, and their nerves and their feet are way down regulated, 3 sets of 10 is not going to help that person. They need to do a lot to get those feet back online. And they got to
undo a lot first.
Yes. And so to me, it actually strikes me that it could be a very similar story with the upper body. Like if someone can't even do a good iso push-up, just doing a few iso push-ups like twice a week, you need to do a lot more than that from that just core and breath perspective. It strikes me that doing like something like that single arm bench press hold with breaths where maybe each set takes you 3 or 4 minutes, that's going to give you so much more exposure per like time capita, I guess, if that's a term, to get you in a readiness state to actually go do that iso push-up and do a good job with it, with the breathing ability.
Yeah, no, that's a good point too, where it's, if you've got a lot of undoing to do, just doing a couple of 5-minute isos, a couple of times a week, like 3-4 times a week, like it's not going to cut it. You're essentially maintaining your quote unquote compensation. You're not really doing enough to undo. Like one of my favorite quotes, I think I saw it on, I think Tommy John just posted the other day. He was like, people who train 3 to 4 times a week, how do they expect to feel good or operate at a high level 7 days a week? You're obviously missing 4 days out of the week of training. So it's kind of the same concept. Like you really need to be doing something every day if you're trying to undo something, because you're doing the compensation every day. So you need to increase the demand or the volume to more, so you start to undo and break that compensation.
With that, I think like a companion session is really helpful. Like a morning, something I've been into, I mean, throughout my life, but every time I do it, I feel so much better. It's just like a short morning session with just some basic stuff, basic bodyweight stuff I need to work on. Yeah. And that just a little bit more exposure. And I forget where I heard this story. It might have been, I think it might have been in Frank Forensich's his book, or Rafe Kelly was talking about it, or maybe a combination. But like in some cultures, they don't even know what exercise is. That's a foreign word to them because their life is movement. They're always doing work. Like they're whatever their daily chores, their daily routine involves lots of physical things. And so it's not like, oh yeah, you just, 4 times a week for 45 minutes, you do some stuff. And when these cultures will see like a foreigner come and stay at like an Airbnb or a hotel, and then that person like might work out, they're like, what are you doing? That's weird.
Yeah.
This is our whole life is movement. We don't know what this is. So it definitely puts a little different perspective. And I know Tommy, he had a video that made me laugh. He was carrying his laundry like several miles, like over his head to the laundromat or something like that. And we don't, or he had to post like every hill for like a period of time, every hill you see, you must sprint up it. Doesn't matter what it is.
Right.
I kind of think about that I work from home a lot, and I think about it even in the house. Okay, sprint up the stairs. Just like, we don't think about the daily walk, whatever we're doing around the house or the yard or whatever. We don't think about that as just an opportunity to move in a different way to kind of add to our total physical competency. So I totally hear you on that. It's hard with so many clients or like student athletes whose lifestyle is so much sitting, but you got to take advantage of those opportunities to get the most out of reversing the patterns you found yourself in.
I know, and it's endless. You could do a lot of things, but people are lazy. They don't want to do it. So
yeah, there is something that's inviting about a hill though. Like Paul Cater was on the podcast. He was like, it's just, if you're a kid or watch a dog or something, like there's just something about a hill that says, sprint up me.
Yeah.
Just put more signs around, stairs, like, or hills. Maybe people would. Maybe that's a challenge for people listening. For the next week, every set of stairs or hills, you just sprint up it. Start a movement. Just starting. What if every set of stairs at the, not that malls are a thing anymore, but like people just had to run up them as fast as they could every time they got to it.
That is true. But I remember that at malls. There's always kids just running upstairs because they're just so excited.
Yeah, it's just so much fun. So this question, you had mentioned it, but I do want to ask this to you in the light of you as a chiropractor. Is what is good posture to you? I think good posture means different things to different people. I know you mentioned the breath, but then I know obviously you'll be doing manual work on clients as well. And so what to you is good posture? Like what a person, it's like, okay, this is good posture. You're doing well from this perspective.
Yeah. So I think just from my line of work, the first thing I look at is around the spine. So, and this is just my experience, and everyone's going to have different opinions on the matter, but I mean, your spine, I typically like to have it as straight as possible. So if you think of the natural S curve that we have, if the S portion is greater, or sticks out more somewhere, then just by gravity, there's going to be more pressure put on that point. So I always look at the spine when it comes to good posture, and just kind of take it from there. And so, it's kind of a open-ended question. So for people who's kind of listening, you can always start there. I use adjustments as a tool to definitely kind of help and figure out, okay, well, if they're not able to engage this or they can't get into this position, sometimes it is a mobility issue, so they can't physically get there. So an adjustment can sometimes help them reach that end point. And then I always back it up with some sort of exercise, right? Because if it's an external, if my hands or my, adjustment is making them move, they still need to figure it out from an internal awareness on how to maintain that position. So backing it up with some sort of ISO, like that puts them in a certain position, that forces them to stay in that position. And, the muscles have to work to maintain that position. There's a lot of stuff that I do, but yeah. Yeah,
that makes sense. I think posture is fluid too. It's not just one. You aren't like just stuck in one position. Oh, this is good posture, So that, I do think that element of it makes it a little bit more hard to describe. But the generally long spine idea, and obviously we do have a S curve. We shouldn't be totally straight. Like that wouldn't be very effective. But a few guests, Edith Hoyce and Sam Wiest, who both have, I feel like they, like Sam, a lot of background in the martial arts and then track and field. Edith into a ton of like kind of the more, I guess you call it awareness-based systems like Feldenkrais and someone who is, I think, very sensitive to like the motions of the body. have both talked about at least like an extensible or an extended a sense of tallness. Like Sam Weiss would say, you see good track athletes, elite jumpers. They aren't like all hunched over. They have this longness of the spine to them. And obviously it doesn't mean it's like a ramrod. Like it's not straight, like totally straight, but it's definitely not like hunched over and compressed. It's so I definitely understand what you're saying with that. And then also just tacking onto that, that's something that Tommy John was telling me about his chiropractic practice back when I first met him and was talking to him, is like, yeah, so many times, people just seek out some sort of treatment or intervention, and then they don't have anything that solidifies that. It's like, just go get your back cracked, once a week and don't do anything else. And then you're just going to keep coming back. Right. Like, it's probably just make for a great business model in some sense, but like Tommy was very into having people do work, and that being like the greater percentage and the actual passive stuff being a lot smaller percentage.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And to kind of to go back when you're talking about the spine, I use the term like elongation. You want to elongate your spine, because extension is just essentially you going backwards. So a lot of people can have too much extension, but I think you were saying that. But it's funny too, because a lot of people think, oh, I need to build up my back and extend to fix my posture. And it's no, you want to think elongate. Stretch as far up and down as it can go. It's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, I know Sam had said, he said it wasn't like, I was asking him to describe, I think on the last podcast, like, what do you do and how do you do? And I think he had mentioned it's not necessarily that straightforward. He had made a video with some different visualizations and intentions you could have. And I think a lot of that went into more like a martial art practice or a meditative type movement practice. But to me, I think, people can get in trouble with just thinking of like, or even like, all right, I'm going to straighten out my back. So I'm going to do these rows and I'm going to like crank backwards, to like somehow fix this. And then you end up kind of overextending that motion. And it's not, whereas the visual is more about like length versus, like you said that with that. Okay. So we talked about this a little bit before we started recording. I'm super fascinated with this stuff. And back to Jay Schrader, I know when he had talked about athletic performance, I've heard him mention like organ systems. And it's always interesting when you take that step out of the known, right? Because so many coaches, it's like, all right, well, we know muscles. And then, you take that jump and it's like, okay, now we're in the nervous system. That's a little bit of a foreign land. And we're trying to learn about and then organs, like no one even, like people, like that's just something that's way out there for a lot of people. And so what's your take on the, like pulling into position, like extreme isos, and then in light of organs or meridian lines, like getting into kind of the Chinese medicine element of things?
Yeah, so to kind of tie it all together, I mean, we are beings, we are electrical beings, number one, and obviously we use energy. And so Eastern medicine, or, there's plenty of them, but let's just say the Chinese, they looked at our bodies from an energy standpoint. So where was energy getting blocked? Where was it, getting backed up? Why wasn't it going through here? And so that's where the meridian lines essentially kind of originated from. And the meridian lines are all connected to an organ. And they run through our body. They typically start in the hands and feet, and then they'll kind of pass through a line in our body, and then they'll end up at an organ. Now kind of fast forward, there's this doctor, Jerry Tennant. I've kind of read some of his books, and, just before we move forward, this is all speculation and, opinion, right? This is his opinion on what the meridian lines did to our body. But basically he found out that our muscles acted like power sources for our organs. And so when you think of, when we contract and relax a muscle, it's like a spring or a pump almost. It kind of goes up, down, contract, relax. And that pump actually would create electricity or electrical current that would then follow the meridian line and then actually power that organ. And the meridian lines are very similar to anatomy trains, the fascial lines. And fascia, which surrounds our muscles, is actually semiconductive. So it actually can transmit electricity, electrons through through our muscles, or that's where the electricity kind of goes through. And so when it goes and so contracting a muscle is one thing, but also the tone of the muscle is also a different thing. And the tone is essentially the amount that it stays contracted when you're not really doing anything. So he found out that the more tone you had in a muscle, the easier it was for kind of communication back and forth between that muscle would go, or I guess just say electricity could pass through that muscle. So if you didn't have tone in that muscle, then the energy or the electricity or something couldn't go through that muscle. And then therefore it couldn't support and power the organ that it was associated to. So that's kind of like the basis theory of the modern theory of what meridian lines kind of do in the Western world. But if you kind of take it from a standpoint, I mean, our organs all have a job in our body to do, right? Our thyroid produces hormones, our stomach acid, and the list can go on. And so from a performance standpoint, just to think that our muscles are the only thing that powers our performance, right? Okay, well, the muscles make us move. Well, what's making the muscles do their job, right? And so everything kind of ties back to just, we're one big entire system. And so if something's lacking in the system, then it's going to affect something else in the system. So kind of tying the organs, making, Jay would always say, we would recruit or bring in all the organ systems to kind of help us propel us in, whatever we were trying to achieve. And so I think that kind of would be my best guess of tying it together, because, I mean, we need fully functional organs to just live our daily life. And when you think of from an isometric standpoint, if you learn to contract and pull and engage certain muscles, you're going to increase the tone of that muscle. And what makes an iso cool is because you're actually creating a lot of tone throughout the whole body. Just to hold a position requires a lot of pulling, a lot of stabilizing, a lot of engaging, breathing. So it's different than, let's just say, doing a rep, where a rep is kind of, up, down. And then even on the down or the up, some people are relaxing other areas, or even at the top, they'll maybe rest for a couple seconds. And so you don't really increase tone very much when you kind of do traditional concentric exercises. You increase mass, right? It makes your muscles look bigger, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the tone is there. So that's kind of cool. That's kind of, I've been like, when I've kind of go down and do my journey and path through isometrics, that's been made the most sense to me. And I've actually felt and gotten really good results. Like, sometimes in my practice, if there are people that have stomach issues where they can't digest, they don't produce enough stomach acid. One way to do it is, here, take some HCl, which is just a digestive enzyme, which helps, right? But again, that's an external source. So what you could do is you could find the stomach meridian line, figure out which muscles are really lacking in tone, or just even mobility for that matter, for anything, and really start doing exercises to crank up those muscles on that meridian line. And you actually watch these people's stomachs, they get better. It takes a lot of time though. It's not a like, let's do this for a week and you're going to start feeling better. It takes a long time to create tone in a muscle and kind of restore that pathway. But it's certainly effective if people are willing to give it a shot. And the cool thing about that is it doesn't require, like, you got to go buy this and you got to, go see this person, or, maybe you have to see someone to kind of get a general guideline of what's going on. But then you kind of take it, go home, and it's kind of up to you to do the exercises and really want to fix this problem. So, I mean, I've seen it work, and I think that's kind of what's going on when we talk about Tommy John. Like, hey, you need to put in the work. I'm here to just kind of tell you, hey, this is what I see, what's wrong, and this is how it could be connected. But this allows you to put in the work yourself and reap the benefits. So,
yeah, I do definitely think back to the 3x10 will fix this mentality. Is some stuff just takes more, and it takes a lot of intention and a lot of time. I like you said about Jerry Tennant. It is. I think people probably will have different beliefs on exactly what's going on with different things. It can be a little bit hard
sure.
to define and make those connections. Same thing with Bob Cooley, like when someone says this is linked to this meridian. But I, at the very least, I don't think that we can get away with just the interconnectedness of the body, that it's not just this, or even like if someone doesn't have a lot of muscle tone in one muscle, to just say, I mean, my favorite's always like, oh, well, your glute medius is weak, so do these like clamshells or something. It's like, well, how did it get weak? Like, did it just one day decide to, and honestly, even when they say it is, I don't even necessarily believe that, because a lot of times those kind of, saying that that's the thing that's happened. Like, well, why did their suddenly glute medius just go weak if that's what you think really happened? But to ask, I always think, well, if someone's posture is a certain way, if someone's really lacking the ability to get tone in a muscle group, well, why is that? Do they just wake up one day? It's like, no, I feel there has to be something deeper in the body that is bringing that up. So I always just find it really interesting to explore those connections as I'm just starting to read about that type of thing. And I do think that as well, like especially with the extreme ISO stuff, it's interesting to think about, well, why does this work? What about this is so? And I think it's a very systemic thing. Like it's just a generally good practice to do. That has a lot more benefits, I think, than even just like, all right, this, you're an agonist antagonist, like a very like just muscle centric. I feel like there's more to it. I just haven't gone through it.
Yeah, well, like, I mean, increasing tone in your muscles has been shown to help promote or to help circulation. So the heart obviously pumps blood away, and then the veins have to bring it back to the heart. Well, they don't really have a pump to bring it back to the heart. So the tone of the muscle actually helps push that blood back to the heart. And same with lymphatic drainage. If you have no tone in the muscle, where do you think, that lymph isn't going anywhere. So like, there's a lot of things you can tie it to of just like, oh, this is actually maybe a practice of like healthy living or just healthy movement, healthy lifestyle, as opposed to like, yeah, I'm going to get stronger and really fast in my sport and all this other stuff. So
Mark,
which are also added benefits though,
obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah, without question. And that's one of those things too, is I think I've done some of the ISO stuff just as a standalone in the past without really doing anything else. And I actually didn't notice, like, it's always been the combinations of using it that I've found the most effective. Like just doing it by itself, I haven't gotten as much out of it, because it's almost like it's the, and I think maybe we've had this conversation, but like the idea of using the ISOs as a recovery tool. It's this wonderful general recover tool, and then go do your explosive stuff, and then do the ISO holds as this general recover tool. And I guess you could do that either on the macro, like once a day do the explosive, once a day do the ISOs, or even in the same session if you don't have time, or day to day, day A, B, or whatever. But yeah, it makes me think about it as that as well. I appreciate it more the more I learn about those movements.
Yeah.
Mark, as a chiropractor who's done a lot of work in neurology, I think about this sometimes, or a lot, is I think about what does it mean to be strong? And I've had conversations with coaches who talk about, well, one element of getting stronger, like you can go to the gym, and I've seen this with athletes who are like swimmers, for example, or track athletes. Like they go and they get better at squats or deadlifts or Olympic lifts. But some of the reason that they just got better at those movements was they just learned to compress their body a little bit better. They learned to arch their back a little bit more, or their pelvis shifted forward a little bit. Like the body aligned itself to handle vertical loading. And I mean, I think a little bit of being able to compress the body is a good thing. But sometimes just saying you moved a bar with more weight from point A to point B, yes, maybe the muscles did a little bit more, or you had a little more mass, but also maybe compression, just your posture and compression was a part of that too. And that doesn't necessarily transfer to being a great athlete, or it could be a negative transfer at some point if you took it far enough. So anyways, what I'm trying to ask is, like, neurological strength, like what does that mean to you in your experience in neurology?
So I guess the first thing that comes to my mind is, our brain is the command center, so it'll tell your muscle what to do pretty much the entire time. And so if it's telling it to be weak for whatever reason, then it's going to stay weak. No matter how many reps you do, or whatever exercise you're trying to do to strengthen that. And so a lot of it's kind of perception. Like if you essentially think that you are strong, then that kind of does transfer it over to a degree, but it's really overcoming kind of that mental aspect. And so you want to like a good example is the jumping, right? Like we're only going to jump as high as we know as we can land safely. And so that's just like your body perceives that you can land this safely. So I'm gonna inhibit your muscles to only jump this high because I know that this is going to make me safe. And so that's kind of sums it up. So neurologically, if you can trick your body into thinking that it's, hey, I'm strong, I can land, I can do this safely, then I mean that's neurological strength. Um, and that's kind of what isometrics are. You're kind of pushing your body to the limit of, okay, this is kind of unsafe in the mental aspect. You're not actually doing anything unsafe, but your brain thinks something bad is going to happen. Like, hey, this is really discomfort. Why are you putting me through this? And so being able to push that threshold of just discomfort, um, within reason, right? Like, I don't want you to put weight on your back and just, withstand that, but more of that internal awareness. So how much discomfort can you create from the inside out, not externally, factors coming in. But the more that you can do that, the more you can stay calm, breathe, smile to yourself when you're going through that discomfort, I believe that translates over more to what neurological strength is, because then you're more in control. You're telling your body what to do as opposed to your brain inhibiting what you want it to do. So kind of switching that mindset, and that takes a lot of practice to do.
Yeah. So outside of a lot of the, you know, I think about like all the, I don't know if you call them tricks, but like little adjustments that like a chiropractic neurologist could make on an individual to help them get more out of their nervous system and their strength. Like not everyone has easy access to those types of things. And like just the perception, like it, and I've seen this, and I'm sure that I'd be curious for any take that you would have on this, but why do we give two different athletes like the same program? And obviously there's if you're super fast twitch, you're super slow twitch, you're X, but two athletes who are kind of about the same body type, the same, let's say they're both, I don't know, 200-meter runners in track. So they're both kind of the same type of athlete, and you give them the same program, and one might just make gains off it, or is making more continual progress than the other. And yeah, you could say there's life stress and things too. But I saw this in swimming when I worked in swimming. Is there was just I would just see there'd be these years where the athletes who are more at the top, like they would just make year over year they were getting better, and then there was kind of this second tier of athletes that about every year they kind of swim the same, and but I would at the same time I would watch, like I would just see the way that some of those higher level athletes would perceive the workout. Their motivation, it was just different, and it was something that you had to kind of be there, I think, to see. But I am such a strong believer in the perception. So what you're saying is you get more out of your body neurologically, like your brain says yes to the stimuli more readily when you have the state of like love, like you're like in the sense of you don't see it as a threat, you see it as an opportunity. You know what I'm saying? Like I guess maybe that'd be a little bit more like what you're, to kind of maybe repeat back to you a little bit, or my sense of what you're saying.
Yeah, like the intention part, right? Like, what's my intention going into this? Is it to get better? Is it to just get through the workout? Is it to, what are you thinking about during the workout? So like you said, it's when you see those continuing athletes that get better, I don't, it's almost be cool to have a survey of like, well, what were you thinking about during this workout? Or, their overall mindset. Because your intention is where you place your energy. And so if your intention is elsewhere, then your energy is not in the moment or in whatever workout you're doing, and you're not getting the most out of it. I mean, that's kind of, you look at Joe Dispenza's work, he goes into literally your thoughts, where you place your intention is where your energy goes. And you only have so much energy throughout the day, right? You eat, you sleep, you recover, but if you're not utilizing that energy, it's going somewhere else. So
yeah, I think that'd be really cool to create like, yeah, some sort of survey. It would be tough to eliminate I think a lot of people would be inclined to say something that wasn't completely true on how motivated they were, right? Like everyone want to say, oh yeah, of course I'm a 5 out of 5 with motivation and those kind of things. Or of course I'm, this and that. But I do find it interesting, or even, yeah, if you could figure out how to do that, I would be really interested in those results, because I think it's a really important part of the equation, and how you go into everything. And we've heard, I know I've heard throughout my career of athletes who have completed programs that were considered horribly put together programs, but their intention to be better was just off the charts. And they still succeeded. They just wanted to be good so bad, and they steered the program to their will almost. And I just think that's a really interesting concept.
I think that's most important out of any program, really. Any program. What's your intention behind it? Yeah.
Well, hey, Mark, it's, I think we got through just about all these. I will ask you one more quick question on just with the neurological elements. I don't know, this is something we went through quickly, but drop landings and depth landings, and just neurological recruitment. So tell me a little bit about that, how you mentioned it before, depth landings or drop jumps or dropping and landing, and that as an assessment of the neurological system.
I think depth jumps and, altitude drops, whatever you want to call them, they're a really good tool. It's almost secondary though. You need to learn the basics first. So if you don't know, for instance, if you're in the bottom of a push-up, you don't know how to recruit certain muscles or get certain things engaged, or breathe correctly, then you kind of have no business kind of dropping and then trying to catch yourself in that position, just because you're not going to learn how to turn on those muscles if you already can't do it to begin with. Now, I have seen some instances where that's totally the exact opposite. And again, it probably goes back to this intention piece where let's say they don't know how to turn on muscles in the bottom of a push-up position. Well, they will literally do hundreds of drop catches or drop push-ups or whatever until their body literally figures out how to turn on those muscles. And I've seen that work just as well. It's just kind of a matter of what your intention is and what you want to do. But I personally don't use them very much. But the concept, in my opinion, behind them is that when you kind of land, you essentially have to turn on every single muscle to stop you from, continuing to fall forward. And so that balance of contraction, co-contraction, or honestly, whatever is going on, I'm not sure at the molecular level, but you certainly have to engage a lot. And so from a standpoint of just overall fitness, learning to contract those muscles fast and stop yourself is really just beneficial from just a fitness standpoint. And again, if you do them continually over and over and over again, and you start fatiguing some muscles, then your body's going to start recruiting other muscles to make sure that you catch yourself in that position. And so it's a really good way of bringing things out that you may not necessarily know what was there. But again, that requires kind of high volume, lots of reps. And so I don't know if people are willing to kind of do that many to kind of get that type of benefit. So I guess from a standpoint of if you already know the position really well, they can be very beneficial in kind of creating more awareness of that stopping power. Because remember, your body is only going to allow you to do something if it knows it can safely return or land or stop itself. So if you can train that stopping mechanism, it'll actually propel you in forward doing, whatever you want to do, like a vertical jump. I've seen people vertical jump where they'll do altitude drops at their height. So they'll jump, let's say it's 20 inches, 25 inches. So they'll set the height of an altitude drop for 25 inches. And they'll just continually land over and over and over again until they get really good at landing from that 25 inches. And then a couple weeks later, their vertical's a couple inches higher. It's literally all they do, just because they allow themselves to land safely.
Yeah, I've heard that the body will only, your body will only let you jump as high as it knows that you can land it. I like the little anecdote about athletes who didn't maybe have the quote unquote perfect muscle activation patterns and were still doing those drops and just through their intention and will to get good at it, figured it out. It it makes me think about like I've heard stories of that in the like sprinting. I think is a little bit more straightforward in some senses. If you grew up playing all sorts of different sports, you're sprinting in lots of different contexts. But jumping is a little different because it's not something that is necessarily required frequently in every sport. But some people who are like high level dunkers and they figured out these amazing dunks. So often you hear, well, I just wanted so bad to be good at this. I just like, they had this vision of being amazing. And so they obsessively practiced it, and their body just their body was able to self-organize without probably getting into all the little, we're going to do this kind of plyometric here, and we're going to do that kind of plyometric or this strength thing to fill in this gap that you're missing. It's like, no, their will and intention was as such that they set this goal and their body was able to do what it needed to do to get there. And I guess, the question always is, well, if you couldn't get there, what do we need to do to help you get there? And I think that's obviously the course of training, but it is cool to observe those anecdotes of athletes whose will is so strong that it kind of carried everything else along for the ride, it's
maybe that's cool anecdotes. Maybe that's what neurological strength is. That's like, in a nutshell, that's what it is.
Yeah. I like that. Cool. Well, hey, I think that's a good place to leave off. I will be pondering that throughout the rest of the day. But yeah, I appreciate your time, Mark. Thanks so much for sitting down to chat again and coming back on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in for another show. Thank you so much for being here. And if you enjoy the episode, you can help us out by leaving us a rating or review on Spotify, iTunes, whatever you're listening to. Would totally appreciate that. We'll see you guys next week.